Are you curious about how prisons monitor inmate communication in the digital age? Do you wonder about the latest technological advancements that have made it easier for prisons to monitor inmate communication? Our guest, Albert, is an expert in monitoring prisoner communication and technology. In this episode, Albert shares his insights on the challenges and opportunities of monitoring prisoner communication in the digital age.
Welcome to the JP Podcast. I'm your host, John.
Hi, and I'm Crystal.
And today's episode, we have Albert on, and Albert works for a company that monitors prisoner communications and technologies, which I've never heard of before. You know, I never knew they had half the stuff that he was mentioning in the pre-interview, but we're going to get him on here, and let's get started. All right. Well, welcome to the show, Albert. It's been but it's a pleasure to have you on the show. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I thought we were ending already. I was like, wow, that was
Yeah, I kind of fumbled that one. But Albert, why don't you tell us a little bit about the company? We're not going to mention the company, you know, we
Sure.
never do on the show here, but tell us about it and what you do.
Sure. So currently I work for a corrections communications company, and there's several out there. I've been involved in telecommunications and technology going on 33 years.
Wow.
And my bachelor's degree is in computer information systems, and my master's is in Masters of Science in Management from Ohio University. So I got a little bit of, you know, book smarts behind the whole thing, but a lot of experience because I worked my way up from the bottom. So I've kind of seen every step of communications and technology at work, right? So way back in the advent of, you know, when people were installing second lines in their home for the AOL dial-ups and the Prodigy and all those things, right? I used to install those. So I was very heavily involved through that whole process, you know, all the way through DSL and you know, the cable modems and the Wi-Fi and so I currently run a department, probably around the neighborhood of about 100 people, and we support all of our customers in the prisons and jails throughout the U.S. So.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in the beginning with Crystal. So as far as technology and communications, what are we talking about when it comes down to these, I don't want to say these prisoners, but prisoners?
Sure. So it's a couple of things, right? So it's not just, I don't want everybody to think that it's just, you know, everybody has a phone and everybody has, you know, like a FaceTime type application that they can use. It's all very controlled, right? And there's a purpose behind all of it. Phone calls from jails and prisons they've been recorded since the inception of phone calls in prisons. Right.
Yeah.
So since they started doing that, you know, they've used phone calls as evidence, you know, where the inmates are calling their friends and family, sometimes, you know, fellow gang members and affiliates and things like that, and kind of spilling their guts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all of that gets captured, you know, all of it's recorded, and it's all, you can use it in court. Right.
Yeah.
So, so it's been for a purpose. We've twisted that a little bit in the sense that we've added some technology to kind of add to what's going on currently in society, right? So while phone calls are still popular, the video visitation has really picked up steam, right? Because everybody's used to either, you know, a Facebook chat or a you know, FaceTime or, you know, WhatsApp video calls and things like that. So we've become a very video-centric society from that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what's happened is, you know, you got to remember the segment of inmates that's incarcerated right now. They've probably had a digital device, you know, like a cell phone, most of their lives. And most of their lives, they've been able to make calls like that from those devices, right? Even from their home computer when there was some of those services that would allow you to do that, the Skypes, you know, and some of the other ones that were like that. So we do the same, except again, in a very controlled environment. We record all of the video conversations. And then we also have like even and most companies that do this are doing the exact same thing that we are, right? They have a messaging feature that they capture all the messages going back and forth from the friends and family to the incarcerated. So so it's all very controlled, it's all recorded, it's all for a purpose. You know, a lot of it is investigations. A lot of it is to, you know, possibly prevent anything further, you know, from happening. For example, you know, a lot of times you'll see that inmates try to plan things from jail. I think we've all heard those stories, you know, where inmates, you know, they instruct, you know, the gang members or, you know, fellow you know, conspirators to do things. And so that type of technology is used to capture that kind of activity. So
you're saying that there's cell phones in the prisons? What else are they using besides cell phones for these apps?
So it's not cell phones; they're your regular phones on the wall.
Okay.
And then, and actually, what we've added though is a lot of these devices, like tablet devices, they'll have phone dialers on them, so they can actually make a phone call off of a tablet, right? But it goes through the same system that it does, you know, for the phones that are on the wall. So that's really how they make their phone calls, right? So it's no different than using a phone on the wall. That technology's been in, you know, in force ever since they put phones in the prisons. So some states, you know, for example, Texas was probably one of the last states to allow phones in the prisons, and that happened probably up to 10 years ago, I think is when.
Wow.
Okay.
Before that, they never had phones in the prisons. And can you imagine? You know?
Yeah.
So
because you always see it in movies, everybody standing in line to use the phone, and that was their only communication to get out. You know, so they are tablets. You're saying, now, are these assigned to them immediately, or is this a program they have to join once they're in? How does that work out?
Yeah, so it depends. It depends on the facility and how they want to control the population of the facility, right? So some of them will do a one-to-one tablet, right? So as when an inmate gets booked and they're checked in, you know, they hand them a tablet, or in some facilities they share the tablets. It just depends where they are. And so then they put in their PIN, and then if there's any money on their account, then, you know, they can either play games, watch movies, listen to music, and you know, it's a lot of activities that can go on these devices. Here's the draw of using a tablet in a jail or a prison, is that if the inmate, and I think we're all guilty of this, if an inmate is on a tablet, okay, and they're playing Angry Birds, and they're, you know, listening to music, and they're watching a movie, what are they not doing?
Yeah.
Right? They're not getting into fights, you know, they're not causing any trouble, they're not trying to sell drugs, they're not trying to, you know, rape anyone. I mean, they're doing, you know, everything like what normal people in society do. They get on their phones. How many of us are guilty of getting on our phones? Then, you know, we look up and here, you know, 3 hours have gone by.
Right.
I mean, I think we're all guilty of. Inmates are no different, you know.
Right.
So it keeps the temperature of the facility down.
And you had mentioned in the pre-interview, you do have or supply apps there, like learning apps or any other apps that they could actually do better. You know, like
Sure.
It's hard for me to say, but I know what I want to say. You know.
Yeah.
I was thinking on the lines of education. Like, are they using it for educational needs? Are they able to use social media? You know, all that type of stuff. Are they able to do those things?
Right. Yeah. So education, absolutely. That's probably one of the biggest uses of these devices in jails and prisons. And what's really amazing is that there's a lot of colleges and universities throughout the U.S. that already have programs in jails and prisons, and they, you know, they carry in, like I've seen programs where, you know, the master's students, right, that are maybe getting education degrees, they'll be wheeling in, you know, 20, 30 laptops, you know, into a prison, and they bring them into the classroom, and they'll hand them out to the inmates so they can use them to, you know, perform a class time, right?
Okay.
So it's very similar to that. So yes, I mean, it does have that affinity to it. But we're not the only ones that provide educational content. You know, there's some that's very canned educational content. Most of it's geared around, you know, getting your GED. Many inmates don't have GEDs, so it does a lot of GED prep. But it's also kind of a catch-22, but in a good way, right? The inmate can use the education programs for free, all right? And we've seen in some instances where inmates have had their prison sentence reduced because they've completed so many hours in education.
That's cool.
Okay, so that's looked upon as good behavior, right? They call it learn to earn in some facilities, right? So they want to learn to either earn money to be put on their books so they can watch movies and you know, whatever else they want to do. Or it's looked at favorably so that when they go up for parole, you know, it's looked at, well, you know, I see that you've completed all these courses, you know, while you were incarcerated. You know, that tells me that you're really wanting to be a contributing member of society. You know, we want to go ahead and grant you early parole. And we've seen that. I've seen that personally. I was in New Mexico, and a young lady had a 36-month sentence. And she had gone through a whole series of classes on the devices, and she had 3 kids at home, right? So she's got 3 kids, but she's in prison. Because of those training courses, she actually reduced her sentence by 18 months.
Wow.
Okay.
So that's fantastic, right? But here's the benefit that I think a lot of folks don't understand. The benefit of that is twofold. Number one, you get the mother back home with her children.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest benefit, right?
Yeah.
That's, you know, that's really what's important for the children is to have their mother back home. But the side benefit of this are 2 things. Taxpayers do not pay for this technology to be in jails and prisons. Okay, so that's a huge benefit. So at no time is this ever being charged to you know, either county or state taxes. Okay, the other benefit of that is it actually reduces the amount of money that's spent for inmates, which is taxes, right? So let's just say that, you know, it takes in your average jail or prison. Prisons are a little bit more because it's a little bit different. But let's say in a prison, it costs $50,000 a year to maintain an inmate. Okay. So let's say that facility that lady was in, it costs $50,000 a year. So if you reduce her sentence by 18 months, that's a year and a half. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, we've saved taxpayers $75,000 in taxpayer money to not house her. Okay. Right. We don't spend nearly that on rehabilitation and reducing recidivism. So, you know, the argument is that a good investment, right? You know, does having these types of devices in jails and prisons really make a good argument to kind of expand on that whole idea? And we're seeing good numbers from it.
You know, excuse me, I don't see the argument of, well, you know, this is not good. They're prisoners. You know, they should just be doing their time, because before the technology existed, they've had programs. They've always had libraries and books and ways for them. To me, this is just a new technology version of what they've always had, and it's probably easier for them to engage into some programs, because I don't know, nobody goes to the library anymore. Everybody's doing it from their phones or tablet. Right? Mm-hmm. You know.
Yep.
Probably a faster track would seem like.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. The argument that we've seen, right? Because I'm in the business, right? So is that, well, you know, my kids, I can't get a tablet for my kids. Why should an inmate have one? Mm-hmm. And you kind of, you know, yeah, that's true. But it's not just all games and movies and music, right? There's also the side benefit, and it's a huge benefit, of education. right? And ultimately, I think when you explain some of those finer points about inmates being released back into their communities, whether they're educated or uneducated, right? I know that, if I had inmates being released back into my community, I'd want them educated because, there's statistics that have proven
right,
inmates who have more education are less likely to go back through the system.
right.
I mean, and the numbers are pretty dramatic. So it just based on some of the figures that have come out, right? There's been studies done on the cost of, jail, putting inmates in jail, and what education does to reduce those numbers. Like I'll read off a couple of numbers, and these are widely available on the internet. It's not like something that I've created, but it states, one article here states ex-offenders who complete some high school courses have recidivism rates around 55%. Just some high school courses, it reduces it by almost half, right? Mm-hmm. Vocational training cuts recidivism down to about 30%. Mm. Okay. Even better still. An associate's degree will drop the rate to 13.7%.
Wow.
Okay.
I think what people's main concern, but you've already said it, is if I'm paying taxes, then I don't want it to be wasted on somebody. But that's not an argument. That's not an argument to be said because you're not paying for it.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I mean, and then you got two more figures, right? Like a bachelor's degree will reduce it to 5.6%. So only 5.6% of inmates that get a bachelor's degree will ever come back through the system.
Right.
That's
and a master's degree, it's basically so low that you can't even register it. It's 0%. Okay.
So how are these programs inside the prisons? I believe I tried to ask you that during the pre-interview. Is how are they presenting it to the prisoners? How are they getting the information? Like, hey, this is what you have available to you through this program. Is that something that happens?
Yeah. So usually the command staff, will, before they hand them the tablets, right, or the equipment, because there's kiosks and all different kinds of things that are available to them, whatever that electronic medium that they use to connect, they instruct them. They say, hey, there's you can watch movies and play music, and those are things that you're just spending money on. But if you want to learn something, if you want to improve your life while you're in here, there's educational content on there as well. Now, there's also Bibles and things, and I think we've all heard those stories about inmates when they go into jail. All of a sudden they found Jesus, and they found religion, and it's really helped them out, and that's fantastic, right? But religion isn't the only source that can help them, right? We want to give them another fighting chance. That's education. Education will help all.
Absolutely.
What made them decide to go with these, just say the tablets or something like that? Because in the past, they were sneaking them in anyways, right? So what made them go down this route? Yeah.
So, I guess, this isn't a PG show or anything, so I'm going to talk like a
yeah, no kids watch this show.
I'll just tell you, so in the real world, what ends up happening is you'll get a device, like an iPhone, any kind of cell phone. And what happens now is these are contraband, right? Because this will allow inmates to gain access, not just to social media. The other problem is that they could gain access to maybe their victims, right? That's a big problem. So all the devices that are used in a facility, they're all protected. They're all locked down. They don't have access to social media. They don't have access to email. They don't have access to those types of things. So it prevents them from, following up with either, affiliate members or gang members or victims or anything like that. But what we've seen is inmates, and this is going to get a little harsh, but inmates will keister cell phones for a dollar figure. I've heard stories, and what I mean keister, they'll take one of these, they'll put it in a condom, and then they'll put it up their rectum. Okay.
Wow.
And they'll do 4 and 5 phones at a time when they get booked, because the going rate for a phone in a jail or a prison could be anywhere from $500 up to, we've seen $3,000. Right.
Wow.
So if you're in a bigger prison, you know, you could have inmates that are probably part members of gangs and things like that. And maybe they're working with someone else, but they'll pay $3,000 up to $3,000 for a you know, contraband cell phone, right? Because then that allows them to communicate with victims and, you know, their affiliates and gang members and everyone else. So that's an important commodity in the jails and prisons. By putting in the tablets, we start to take that away, right? So we start to reduce that ability. While they're still not allowed to communicate with those particular types of people, we can control who they communicate with.
So how about feedback? Do you have any program or any survey that they can take and giving you guys, your company, the feedback of what they like about it, or what they would like to see? You know?
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, so I run basically the tech support department for one of the companies, right? And so we hear feedback every day. Right?
Oh yeah.
If anybody hears feedback, it's me, right? But it's important, right? Because they're our customers. Even though they're kind of a captive audience, you know, the family and the friends, they put money on their accounts so that they can communicate with them. Right. This means that they can, you know, do video visitations with their children, right? With their wives, with their mothers and fathers and, you know, relatives and, you know, anyone else that they may care for and that's been approved to do visitation with them. It also, here's the huge benefit, which turned out to be another side benefit. If somebody doesn't have to come to the jail facility or to the prison facility to do an in-person video visitation, it completely eliminates the possibility of bringing in drugs or any other kind of contraband.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
I was just looking at it as a, you know, I don't feel like driving, you know, 3 hours to go see you, you know, but I didn't even think about that as far as, you know, the contraband getting in.
Sure. And that what you just said too is another, you know, feature of it, right? You have family that lives across the country and grandma can't travel because she's 85 years old, you know, and she's maybe not in her best health. You know, how is she going to visit with her grandson that's in, you know, Illinois or, you know, in Pennsylvania or somewhere, right? It's a video visitation does a great job of that. So
that's pretty good. Now, is the usage limited to them? You said the free stuff, you know, of course it's free, but there is things they have to pay for as far as if they want to watch a movie or make a phone call through the tablet itself.
Right. Yeah. Phone calls, you know, there's always a charge for a phone call. In some states, phone calls are free, depending on what the state laws are.
Okay.
So movies and games, and you know, there's a very minimal charge. Every area is different, so I can't give you a charge, but it's not exorbitant. Let's just put it that way. Okay. It's affordable, and it gives the inmate something to do, and that's really the point. That's why I think jails and prisons like these devices, because it gives the inmate the opportunity to stay occupied and not get into fight with the officers, right? Not stirring up trouble, you know, in the day room, not trying to do something else. So it's a safety feature that we use, right, to control the population. So it has a lot of those mental benefits, right? Because what do you do if you have kids? Imagine if you have teenagers at home. What's the one thing you do to torture them?
Take their phones away.
Cut off the internet. Cut off the Wi-Fi.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and it's no different, right? It's you take away their access to the outside world, their ability to communicate, and it hurts. So we tend to see the populations that utilize these devices. They're pretty much well behaved. Now you're always going to have your odd man out, you know, locations where it's going to be. They're just bad inmates, right? And I've been to a couple of those, and it's very interesting. But for the most part, we've seen that it's an overwhelming success to have those types of devices in jails and prisons. So.
I did have a question because I know you and my oldest son is in the telecommunications and IT world. And do you come across things, you see things that an inmate has done and you say, wow, I mean, it was wrong. And you say, I would have never thought to go through that route.
Absolutely. It's very rare, right? Because most of the devices that are put in jails and prisons are hardened devices, right? But I have a saying that I've been saying probably for the last 25, 30 years, right? And being that one of my focuses was in IT security, I have this saying, and it goes, there's a hack for everything.
Okay.
And no matter what device, no matter what network, there's a hack for everything. Okay. Wow. So yes, I've seen some ingenious things done, with equipment in the jails and prisons, and not just with like our equipment, right? I mean, just across the board. I've heard, that they'll tear the phones off the wall and use the magnets, and then, use pieces and parts like a spring from a pen. And then they'll get a little motor off of some other device that they find in the jail, and they'll make tattoo guns.
Yeah.
I mean, they do all kinds of things, right? They make little hot plate warmers, and they do so yeah, I mean, basically, if you give someone enough time, right, to figure something out, they'll figure it out. Inmates all have the same thing in common. They have nothing but time.
Yeah.
Okay. So they sit back and they think of all these things. But yeah, there's a hack for everything, and it's amazing to me. I wish they would put that much energy into being positive, right? But unfortunately, not all people are wired that way. So,
Chris, so when he first approached me and we were talking about it, my first thought was, what? Screw these guys. They're in prison. They don't need anything. But the more and more I got into it, the more I realized, this is actually a great thing. And when he started telling me, and what's that big word you use for going back into prison?
Recidivism.
Yeah, recidivism. I'm going to have them put that on the screen there. But I didn't think about that, And then when you started to say that, okay, it's not with the, taxpayer dollars, because I wonder how many people have approached you with that and said, it's my tax dollars, I have a right. And then you turn around and you say, well, it's not your tax dollars, So no, I think it's a very, very, very great thing. But I also thought about, what if I went to jail, right, for some unknown reason, what I mean? I'm going to want to make sure knowing me, I'm not going to want to go back. You know what I mean? But then you also have that one guy that is probably like, what? This is not the life for me anymore. I'm over it. Let me figure out something so I can get out and stay out. So
right.
Is that what was the first thoughts that came to you when you were hearing about this episode?
I was just trying to figure out what it was actually going to be about. But the one thing that really I thought about with this was, are they allowed to do like social things? Everybody likes Facebook, everybody likes Instagram. Are they able to, get on those social medias as well? And then the educational piece, being a teacher, I definitely want, everybody. I think everybody should be afforded that education. So that would be important, especially someone who is in prison and, ready to turn their life around and they want to be a productive citizen. So absolutely that education piece is key. And, my students don't go to the library to read, they go to the library to socialize. So again, technology, is where it's at as far as getting, degrees and finishing high school, whatever you have to do. So, it just made me think about that.
That's good stuff. I also, Albert, I wanted to bring it up to you because, there are a lot of jobs that will hire you if you have a record, even if you have a felony. I know where we work in the steel mill, depending on the felony, they will hire you. So I know there's a lot of places out there that are willing to hire guys that have been through prison and are out and have been proven that they want to work. So do you know of any places like that?
Yeah, so actually, you know, one of the benefits of living in the Cleveland area is that there's a great resource for inmates. It's called Edwin's Restaurant, and Edwin's is over, it's on Shaker Square, and the entire focus of their restaurant business is based on reducing recidivism of inmates. And what I mean by that is, it's basically a restaurant business that from front to back, top to bottom, left to right, it's completely run by inmates, okay? Yeah. Inmates. So when these inmates are released, they're brought into the program. Edwin's actually has even housing that's provided for them. For it's either 2 or 3 years, I forget how long the program is for. And during this time period, you know, they teach them all of the aspects of working in a bakery, working in a butcher shop, working in a restaurant, you know, serving, you know, food, waiting tables, being a bartender, you know, being a host or a hostess, you know, working in the kitchen, you know, being a line cook, being a saucier or whatever those positions are, right? Doing different jobs within the restaurant business. And what that does is it gives these, you know, inmates, former inmates, the opportunity to learn a skill, a craft that, you know, we all know is used everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. What ends up happening is these inmates become very productive citizens in society, right? They go on to you know, work very good jobs. They pay their taxes, just like the rest of us do, right? And they're contributing members of society, you know, so that things like Edwin's is amazing because, you know, and there's some other programs that are out there that will hire, you know, formerly incarcerated individuals. And I tip my hat off to those people because they, you know, it's been such a stigma in our society,
right? That
it's just been hard to get over. But I think with those types of organizations that are out there that are willing, you know, to give a hand up and not a handout, that's really what's made the difference, you know, and it'll continue to make the difference. You know, I think that Edwin's is actually, you know, sharing the idea into other states and other regions. So that's a very positive thing for what they do. So if you ever get a chance, and I know they're not paying me to say anything, they have amazing food there. It's French cuisine. Yeah. Stop on by Edwin's, make a reservation because the place gets booked out. So
I'm gonna have to check it out. You know about it, Crystal?
I remember when it first opened. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out. I'd like to do reviews of places, but definitely will reach out to them and see and go check it out. But
right.
Yeah, I'm very interested, or not so much interested. I like the way that there are places that will hire you, and if especially coming from that, depending, you said I always thought vocational, you know, that's what I always thought. I pushed, like, if I was ever in prison, I'd learn to become an electrician or something, get out and do that, because there's big demand for that right now. And but you said the number one was the bachelor's degree.
Well, you know, the very top one, right? The one that reduces recidivism down to zero is if former inmate receives a master's degree.
Wow.
It's so low that we don't even see that register.
That's crazy. Yeah.
You know? I mean, but even if you reduced it down to 5% with the bachelor's degree, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You might as well. You might as well. What else are you doing? You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It helps all the way around. But, you know, even though an inmate does all this work, right? And you know, it's a lot of work. I mean, I can tell you, going to school myself as an adult, you know, it's not easy to get a degree, right? It's very challenging. You're trying to raise kids, you know, you're working full time, you're trying to do all these things. That's hard enough in and of itself, right? Someone goes to prison, and, you know, Johnny, you brought this up, right? Let's say you went to prison, and let's just, I'm going to throw out there, you know, a common thing that people go to jail for. Let's just say you were a dad that recently became unemployed, and you were divorced, and you couldn't afford your child support payments because you just couldn't find a job. And let's say you got 3, 4, 5, 6 months behind in your child support payments, right? How many dads are arrested and put in prison because of that? There's a lot of dads that are put away for that, right? And what does that do? It gives them, it basically scars them for the rest of their life, because now they have a record, right? And then they have to contend with that challenge, which makes getting employed even harder, right? But then it does other things, like it removes your ability to vote again, right? So you don't, you have to pay your taxes, but then that means that in some states, you'll never have the opportunity to voice what your political voice is, right? And as Americans, you know, we tend to think that spending time in jail is paying your debt to society, but yet we continue to make these former inmates pay debts into perpetuity, which really doesn't make sense either, right? So there's questions that are like that we have to answer as a society, that I think will truly help build that whole idea behind reducing recidivism, you know, and stopping, you know, that whole, that's an ugly cycle. And listen, you know, I'm Latino, right? And Crystal obviously is African American. And I think we all agree that the highest concentration of the population that's incarcerated is Latinos and Blacks, right? So that's not a big secret. That's just kind of a fact that's out there. I mean, you can look up the numbers and things like that. So that affects a large portion of our population, right?
Right.
So again, we're trying to lift ourselves up. And when society is able to answer some of those basic questions about what we're going to do with inmates once they're released, then I think we're really going to see some progress. And then we'll be the, you know, because we are the #1 country in the world that has the highest amount of people incarcerated, right? Other countries do not have as many people as the U.S.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I will say that looking this information up is very easy anymore. I think it's often overlooked how important it is, because it's a big percentage of our budget in a lot of states, in a lot of counties. You know, I mean, Cuyahoga County, for example, you know, huge population incarcerated, right? Chicago, you know, Cook County, huge population incarcerated. New York City, huge population. So, you know, when you're talking about those types of cities, you're talking about millions and millions, you know, probably even hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on incarcerating people. But there's got to be a better way. You know, there's got to be a better way.
So you think people should educate themselves and look more into it on what our local government is doing, is, you know, for these inmates? Is that something we should be doing, looking into? Maybe we can make a difference by voting a certain way for it?
Yeah, absolutely, right. I mean, I think what the last couple of years has taught us is that we can't just rely on one source of information, right? The media can't really provide all of it, because the media will let you hear what they want you to hear depending on which media chain you follow, right? But honestly, I'll tell you, as an American, I think we have every right to ask questions of not only, you know, our representatives in political office, but reach out and find in our local communities what we're doing. You know, the media and the politicians won't tell us everything. That's where we have to ask those questions of those people, you know, and hold them accountable. That's truly, and that's for every affiliation, every party that gets involved, you know, independents, Democrats, Republicans, it's everyone. So it's not any one political, you know, persuasion. As Americans, I think it's our duty to ask questions, to make people accountable, and just to follow through with it, right? Because we can ask those questions, but if there's no follow through, then it's kind of pointless.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. But then you are going to have your percentage of prisoners that are just they're non-reformable, if that's
Absolutely.
they're not going to deal with this, and they're going to stay a career criminal. And I think that's what if somebody's watching, saying, what about those guys? Well, you've always had that.
Right.
But at least the numbers of the people who want to get out and stay out, those numbers are getting better as we're going along. Now, you guys are you keeping track of people who are not going back into prison? Are these numbers being, what's the big word you said?
Recidivism.
Yes. Now, is that being tracked as far as these are the numbers and we're showing that these guys are not going back into prison?
Yeah. So most facilities, I think all states, all cities track the percentage of recidivism that they have, right? I think they're federally required to do that, because that, honestly, if you go on the internet and you do a Google search, a Yahoo search, recidivism rates in Ohio, you'll pull up, actual statistics, right? Because that's all documented information. And you can do that pretty much for any state you go in, any city you go in. So that information is available, and you'll see it worse in some areas, better in others. It just depends where you're at, but reducing recidivism, it's such a huge component of really kind of bettering our society in general. You look at other communities in the Netherlands, they do some very creative things, where their inmates, even for fairly serious crimes, they're still working in the community, but every night they have to return to like a halfway house, and they can't go out on the weekends and things like that. But they make them contribute back to society, So it just depends what the approach is. We're still learning as a country, what the options are, and we're still very shoot from the hip in some instances. But I think ultimately we'll get there because we're discussing it, and through discussion is kind of where you'll lead to progress. So
absolutely, that's it.
Well, Albert, I appreciate you coming on, and it was very informative, and I've learned quite a bit. I'm sure as I'm editing this, I'm gonna be like, oh, I should have asked this and I should have asked that.
Sure.
So the invitation is there for to have you back on anytime. And if you have any questions, please put down in the comments, and Albert will follow, and we'll answer as best as possible. And don't forget to like and subscribe. But Albert, thank you very much. We appreciate you, and it's a very cool thing that you do. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
And Crystal, thank you for coming back on.
Very interesting.
It's very interesting. So it actually opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I'm glad I learned this on this episode.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I appreciate it, Johnny. This is one of those things, I worked prior to this job, I worked in a normal telecommunications. I worked for a telephone company. And when I left there and I came to this company, I had no idea this even existed. Like, I didn't know this was a thing, right? I started learning about it. And being that I'm involved in my community now, right? I do things and I'm on several boards here in the area, in greater Cleveland area. And I started to hear the same conversations, right, going on with, reducing recidivism, how that affects minority populations, things like that. So I became very interested in it. And I think, honestly, every community that wants to improve their community needs to think about things like this. They're very difficult to think about, right? Nobody really wants to talk about it, but those conversations have to be had.
Yeah.
As difficult as they are, right? But giving the opportunity that you give me to come on here and kind of share with your audience, I think this is awesome. I hope it opens up, a broader discussion on what people can do, to help inmates, and to help inmates help themselves, and to help inmates help themselves within our communities to be better, adjusted and take part of American life. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Albert. And hope everybody liked the show. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And please comment if you have it. You know, let us know what you think. Albert, I tell the audience, I don't block anything. If you like it, put it down. If you don't like it, put it down. We don't care. You know what I mean? Right. So, you know, thank you once again. And hope everybody liked the show. And we'll see you on the next one.
See ya.
Thanks. Bye, Crystal.
Bye. Bye.